dry,
refreshing,
burning,
cool,
hopeless,
joy,
Wilderness and desert will sing joyously.
The Badlands will celebrate and flower.
dead,
bloom,
hostile,
flowers,
lost,
blossom,
Dull.
Colorful.
like the crocus in spring bursting into blossom.
A symphony of song and color.
scavengers,
restful,
lost,
peaceful,
Lonely.
Sanctuary.
Unknown.
Familiar.
God's gifts will be seen in the mountain glories of Lebanon.
awesome Carmel, stunning Sharon,
God's resplendent glory, fully on display.
God awesome, God majestic,
Ailing.
Healing.
Disadvantaged,
loved,
Silence,
singing,
Fiery.
Welcoming.
blind eyes will be open, deaf ears unstopped.
lame men and women will leap like deer, the voiceless break into song.
Springs of water will burst out in the wilderness, and streams will flow in the desert.
Hot sands will become a cool oasis. Thirsty ground, a splashy fountain.
even lowly jackals will have water to drink, and barren grasslands flourish richly.
because even in times of drought and conflict,
the dreamers imagined that blossoming deserts could happen.
They celebrated with joy at the possibilities.
And then they went to work.
And then they waited.
And then the miracle began to unfold.
John, too, was a dreamer.
He wondered if this man Jesus was the one to bring about a land of peace.
And Jesus said,
yes, the blind receive sight,
The lame walk,
Those with leprosy are cleansed.
The deaf hear, and the dead are raised.
The good news is proclaimed to the poor.
Desert.
Blossoms.
thirsty,
loved,
blind,
Imagination,
Broken,
whole,
Conflict.
Peace.
This is your call to peace.
Today's vision of peace from Isaiah is of a desert in bloom, a perfect text for the third Sunday of Advent, Joy Sunday. The wilderness and dry land shall be glad. The desert shall rejoice and blossom. Sometimes peace comes as a desert suddenly in bloom. That is, as grace. We work and work for peace, then here it comes by sheer grace. Have you ever seen a desert in bloom? Sue lived for 8 years in the desert expanse of the middle of Australia, Alice Springs, Australia, right in the center of the country. When the December rains came as they always did, suddenly the desert became vibrant with colors and grasses and flowers all abloom. Like the crocus, it shall blossom abundantly and rejoice with joy and singing. Have you ever seen something so beautiful it seems to sing almost? Or this, you're walking along a path in the woods and suddenly you come upon a meadow, a field of wildflowers in bloom. Who planted those wildflowers? They are the gift of God. Isaiah says they are, in fact, the glory of God in more colors than you can take in. Sometimes our lives can feel like a desert. Then comes the grace of God falling like rain on parched souls. There was a young couple in a former church who had been trying valiantly for a long time to have their second child with no luck at all. Then one night the young woman had this dream of walking in this verdant and green forest with flowers and grasses in vivid color. What was the meaning of the dream, she asked. Shortly after the dream, she conceived their long-sought child. For unto them a son was given. Is this the purpose of Isaiah's dream for us today? To bring us hope. The rains will come, the sun will shine, and your world, our world, will become as a garden in bloom. Thomas Merton, the famous monk, said, "There is in all visible things an invisible fecundity, a hidden wholeness." I believe that. I hang on to that. From hidden places will come wholeness, peace like a desert suddenly in bloom. Peace comes as healing too. Then the eyes of the blind shall be opened and the ears of the deaf unstopped. Then the lame shall leap like a deer and the tongues of the speechless sing for joy. Healing will come, Isaiah says, like streams in the desert. And this healing is not just bodily, but of mind and spirit too. To quote the poet E. E. Cummings, "Now the ears of my ears awake, and now the eyes of my eyes are opened." And our hearts will leap for joy like the deer we see sometimes suddenly leaping across the lawn. Sometimes our eyes see what they've been taught to see, a virtual blindness. We need to then unname things we have named in order to see again. A man in a former church told me that his mother, suffering from paranoia, had taught him to look at the world through paranoid eyes. He was now working day by day to see the world aright. Sometimes we walk with a limp nobody else can see. Our lives crippled and with past trauma. But then healing begins. Something maybe at first in such small measure that we can hardly see. It starts from deep within. It comes by grace, as free as the sun that shines and the rains that fall from the sky. The writer Annie Dillard describes those moments when she as a writer is given just the right word or the right phrase. It is like any moment, she says, of unmerited grace. And then this is her description. It is handed to you, but only if you look for it. You search, you break your heart, your back, your brain, and then, and only then, it is handed to you. From the corner of your eye, you see motion. Something is moving through the air, headed your way. It is a parcel bound in ribbons and bows. It has 2 white wings. It flies directly at you. You can read your name on it. If it were a baseball, you would hit it out of the park. It is that one pitch in 1,000 you see in slow motion. Its wings beat slowly as a hawk's. Jesus had peace as healing in mind when John the Baptist's disciples came to him with a question. John was in prison, having offended King Herod by writing an op-ed in the Jerusalem Gazette, attacking his policies and his personal immorality. When the word got to Herod, he cast him in prison. Prophets sometimes find themselves in prison. The powers that be cannot bear the truth. George Orwell, the writer of 1984, said, "The further a society drifts from the truth, the more it will hate those who speak it." In prison, John had been hearing about the mighty acts and healings of Jesus. So here is the question he sent to Jesus. Are you the one who is to come, that is the Messiah? Or shall we look for another? Or shall we look for another? I think that is a question we all have to answer with our lives. Is this for real? Shall I stake my life on Him or look for another? This may be the quintessential Advent question. Shall I look for another? Jesus sent this word back. Go and tell John what you hear and see. The blind receive their sight, and the lame walk. Lepers are cleansed, and the deaf hear, and the dead are raised up, and the poor have good news preached to them. This is what happens when the kingdom happens. When the kingdom comes near, yes, eyes and ears are opened. You lose your limp and run strong. Lepers are cleansed. The untouchables of our society are touched, and the cast outs are invited in. And yes, the poor receive good news, real good news. And this, the dead are raised up. Not just Lazarus, us too. The North Carolina novelist Doris Betts has a novel entitled Souls Raised from the Dead. She got the title from a sign in a window in a rundown shop in a rundown part of Atlanta. Here's what the sign said in the window. Keys made, knives sharpened, palms red, souls raised from the dead. I've seen souls raised from the dead. People who have felt their souls, their spirit, their spirituality shriveled up and dead. Sometimes it's because of what life has given to them. some great loss or tragedy, some great loneliness. Loneliness can be a killer. Or depression, with our brain chemistry all out of whack. In the novelist William Styron's memoir on his own depression, Darkness Visible, this is how he describes depression. My brain, enthralled to its outlaw hormones, had become less an organ of thought than an instrument of registering minute by minute varying degrees of its own suffering. That's depression. Our souls can become a desert. Then here it comes. Christ comes, God comes, help comes, love comes, or the arms of a church you never expected to have, and a soul is raised from the dead. Anne Lamott, whom we love reading, was a young, brilliant writer in California. She had achieved some remarkable early success as a writer, but her inner life was a mess, struggling with alcohol addictions and eating disorders. Then something began to happen. Grace began to happen. She found a little ghetto church across from a flea market in Marin County, across the bay from San Francisco. Maybe God found her through this church. She writes, "It was where I was taken in when I had nothing to give." And now, she says, it has become, in the truest, deepest sense, my home base. And then she writes, that was where I was when I came to. And then I came to believe. So she talks about her coming to believe. I didn't mean to be a Christian, she said. My first words upon encountering the presence of Jesus for the first time 12 years ago were, I'd rather die. I really would have rather died at that point, she says, than to have my wonderful, brilliant, left-wing, non-believer friends know that I had begun to love Jesus. I think they would have been less appalled if I had developed a close personal friendship with Strom Thurmond. It happened on her houseboat. She had come home recovering from an abortion. She was weak from the loss of blood and in a kind of haze produced by a combination of painkillers and booze. Then suddenly she sensed Jesus' presence in the room with her, watching her, in her words, with patience and love. She turned away. I would rather